Politics Matters, here with your host Imtiaz Ali and ably assisted by my co-host Alex Blower. Alex, welcome.
Salam alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. And today we've got a very special guest. We are joined by the leader of the Liberal Democrat group here at Peterborough City Council, Councillor Christian Hogg. Councillor, welcome.
Good evening.
Good evening.
And
thanks for having me.
No, thank you for coming. Cheers, it's good to see you.
Our listeners should know that Alex and Christian have had a wonderful chat in the green room before we came live on air, and some of the stuff was quite explosive. Unfortunately, some of that stuff we're not going to be talking about today, so that's one for maybe a later show. But something that we are talking about today is democracy, elections, and the monarchy. That is the title of the show today. It's quite a wide-ranging show, but just on a high level, Alex, what kind of things do you think we're going to be covering today?
Well, I hope we have a look at the voting system that we're using today. My views are that first past the post is grossly inappropriate.
So we'll investigate what that is, and we'll talk about what that is and so on, yeah?
Absolutely, and the other alternatives that might be available to us. We're all used to what we've had, and we all get comfortable with what there is, but what does democracy actually mean? I know we touched on this quite deeply in the first show, but we will be revisiting these points this evening. Absolutely,
we will. And Christian, again, thank you for coming on the show. I'm sure you've got a lot of views around how politics works, operates, particularly at a local level, but even at a national level. Do you want to just, before we dive right in, just give us a little bit of a background as to your history, your background in politics? Obviously, you're leader of the Lib Dems at the City Council at the moment, but when did you first get involved in politics, and what was your story?
So, I joined the Liberal Democrats quite late, to be honest with you, 2015, after what for us was a disastrous general election. In fact, I would go on far as to say that pretty disastrous for the country as a whole, because it gave the Tories a majority, and they've been with us ever since. Hopefully that could be set to change at the next general election. Certainly the opinion polls would suggest that would be the case.
We are looking at them very carefully, aren't we?
Indeed.
So, and then when were you first elected on the City Council?
So 2018 to Fletton and Stanground Ward. I've just been re-elected again in this year.
4 more years?
For 4 more years, yeah. And at that point, I became group leader of the Liberal Democrat group in Peterborough.
Well, congratulations on that.
Now that's quite interesting as well with the timeline as to where you've come in, because obviously, and our viewers will be hopefully quite aware that is just at the end of the Tory Lib Dem coalition, which I mean, I'll just ask you, because obviously we're going to speak about modes of voting and modes of democracy today, and obviously it was the first past the post not being able to bring a proper majority that allowed that coalition to happen. What were your views on that coalition and the process that allowed it to happen, Christian, personally? I mean, from a Lib Dem perspective, looking at it historically.
As previously stated, I wasn't a member of the party at that point.
Sure.
Although I have been initially a Liberal voter and then Liberal Democrat all my life. Interestingly, I have yet to cast a vote for a parliamentary candidate that has actually secured a place in Parliament. So, I'm mid-50s now, so arguably 30 years of voting
You're with 2 lefties here, so we can actually we can understand that.
Well, we claim to be, but yeah, go on.
So, yeah, I mean, in terms of the coalition, I think that the Liberal Democrats got a bad ride, if I'm being honest, and that was the reason I joined the party, because I thought, that essentially I could help in my own small way.
Sure.
I think they got a bad ride. Ultimately, I think we were able to get some really good policies through the coalition. The pupil premium is one that comes straight off the top of my head. But also some of the things that we stopped the Tories from doing and saying, no, not with
Such
us.
as?
You can't. It's a long time ago. It's a long time in politics.
I was going to come in there and say it's one of those things where you've stopped the Tories from doing something, so we don't see it, we don't see the impact. And it's almost something that you can't even claim credit for, because you might have stopped a very bad thing, but nobody knows how bad it could have been. Right?
Apart from you kind of look at 2015 and what they suddenly started to bring in after that point, where they had their own majority to work with. And I think, in some respects, it's good to have, a critical friend in the room that says, actually this isn't right, and we need to rethink things. I think sometimes all parties can be in danger of being quite tunnel vision.
Yeah,
absolutely,
no,
of
indeed.
course, yeah.
Okay.
So I think it's about having a wider conversation, and
More voices.
yeah, no, indeed, and I think there's an element of that on Peterborough City Council, for instance. There are a number of things that have come up recently where we've had a conversation with them, and they've toned it down, or they've changed it in some way that has made it more palatable.
Yeah, that's a really good segue into local politics, and that's the first thing I want to talk about. So the purpose of this show is talking about elections, democracy, and ultimately the monarchy. If we've got time at the end of the show, that's a topic in itself, I think. But on a local level, Alex, do you want to just come in and explain the lay of the land on local politics? Obviously, Christian's a councillor locally, I'm a councillor locally, but
Sure.
do you want to just give our listeners an overview of what the situation is?
Well, I'll give them my overview, and it
Go
might
for
not be
it.
one that everybody in the room agrees with. Currently, I would say that what we have is a diktat in charge, a regime running the Peterborough City Council that is bended by national rhetoric. Now, we speak a lot about on this show about democracy, and I will always argue that democracy is meant to be the voice of the people. Without the people that policy affects, democracy does not exist, in my view anyway. Other people will have different views. Today we have Wayne Fitzgerald, who literally will tell you, if you argue against his perspectives, you voted for us, we have a mandate, we can do what we want.
That's something you were hearing under the Boris tenure as well, wasn't it?
Absolutely,
We've got
it was,
a majority of 80. We don't need your votes. We don't need your tick in the box. We're going to get this through anyway.
We've already got the power.
We've already got the power.
That's not democratic, is it?
See, I know where you're coming from.
Sure.
And I'd love to agree with you, but I'm thinking you can't have democracy until it stops working for you. Like when you submit a vote, and this is something that I find really difficult to argue against, where you had Liz Truss came in as Prime Minister after Boris Johnson was forced to resign, and then she was forced to resign, and Rishi Sunak's come in, and a lot of the responses have been, you didn't vote for the Prime Minister, you voted for your local MP. And whoever has enough local MPs voted to form a government will form a government, choose a leader, and their leader will be the Prime Minister. You didn't vote for Bojo, you voted for, in our case, Paul Bristow or Shailesh Vara. That's who you voted for. And that's a difficult thing to argue against until you get to a point where things are happening that you don't really agree with.
And I would agree with you if we felt that local representation at that level that you mentioned of Paul Bristow was actually doing what represents the people of Peterborough. Let's just have a look at some of the things that he's been involved in. Recently, he ran a poll when he was supporting Boris Johnson to say that he had the support of Peterborough people.
Yes,
The
I remember
poll
that.
he done was in a very
Did he poll
select
you
people.
with that one, Christian?
Not me
Were
personally.
you not
no.
one of the people that was polled? I wasn't one of the people that was
Well, it
polled.
was very strange because his poll turned out as 88% and only had just over 2,000 respondents, whereas the Peterborough Telegraph done their own poll, which was versed out to everybody in the Peterborough area, and it had the exact opposite result as what Paul Bristow's had. Now, I've spent a little bit of time having a look at some of the questionnaires that polls looked out to try and base public opinion on, and every single question is loaded. There is obviously a diktat there and an already predetermined narrative that he is looking for confirmation from those rather than listening to the people that he should be listening to represent. And unless you're listening to the people that have elected you to the position, unless you are gauging their thoughts on the policies that you want to evaluate to be put into society, how can you claim to represent these people?
Yeah, and also the people that are typically going to respond to a Paul Bristow survey are people on Paul Bristow's mailing list. And you're only on Paul Bristow's mailing list if you think a certain way politically. You're obviously one of his voters, one of his
Well, let's
fans.
ask a question to the listeners out there tonight. How many of you have spoke out against the perceived narratives that Paul Bristow perpetuates publicly and then been blocked?
That's an alliteration, isn't it? Say that again 10 times quickly. Okay. Any comments, guys? We're always welcome to taking your comments if you're listening online, listening on Facebook. feel free to text in with any comments or questions. We are also taking calls, so if you want to give us a ring, it's 01733 602 133. That's 01733 602 133. Christian, I'm going to bring you back in. Alex has gone on a bit of an off-piste answer there. What I was looking for was, how is local democracy run? How is it made up? How many councillors do we have? You know, how many per ward, all that kind of stuff.
So I would pick you up on one piece of kind of fact, I suppose, really. That so you know, Boris was saying about how he'd got a majority and he's got a mandate to do what he wanted to do. That's not true of Wayne Fitzgerald. He's not got a majority. He's in no over control. He may be the largest party, but he's not in control. Ultimately, there are more councillors that are not Tories than there are Tory councillors.
And this is a very important point, especially in this show, in that more people have voted for somebody else than the ruling party. So there are 28 Conservative councillors on the Peterborough City Council. There are 32 non-Conservative. So by that, you extrapolate that, you're saying more than 50% of the councillors have been voted in because people didn't want to be run by a Conservative administration.
And my understanding of it is that actually Peterborough doesn't need to be run by a Conservative administration correctly. I mean, what's your take of that, Christian? And why do you feel that the Tories are still in charge, given the fact that they can have so much protest levied against them currently?
So essentially, you've got the Tories with, is it 26?
I thought it was 28.
26, I think.
Oh, okay. I'm going to have to go back and check then.
Yeah. Please get on your phones.
Yeah. If Shaz Nawaz is watching, I'm sure
so
he's got like a
you've got Labour, the Lib Dems, the Greens on an equal number. And then in the middle, you've got Warrington First with 4 councillors.
Oh, so it will be 28 then, because it'll be 28 plus 28 is 56,
you're
plus
right,
4 is
you're
60.
Right.
Yeah.
So apologies for that.
Sorry, did you just group Warrington First and the Conservatives in one bucket?
No. So there's no such thing as Warrington First anymore.
Right.
So let's give a lay of
well,
the
no,
land,
there
yeah.
is.
Oh, is there?
It is an established party, but they operate under a grouping on the Peterborough Council as Peterborough First.
Peterborough First. Yeah.
So it's essentially Peterborough First is made up of Warrington First and Chris Harper from Stanground South, who is just an independent councillor who has grouped himself in with Warrington First to form a group on the council. But that's not a political party. The political party is
still
Warrington First. Yeah.
Okay. So we have 4 independents. You can classify them as independents. Chris Harper, who's a defector from the Conservative Party, and 3 Warrington First councillors, Councillor Lane, Councillors Fox and Councillors Fox. Yeah. So you've got the 4 independents.
And Councillor Julie Stevenson as well, who left the Green Party.
Of course, Councillor Stevenson left the Green Party and is now as an independent as well.
But she's an independent on her own. She's not part of the Peterborough First Independents.
Have we lost everyone yet? So this is, I think this is going to be one of the bugbears for you, isn't it, Alex? Because you're like, how can you possibly have people engaging with this kind of process when it's so convoluted, so complicated, and so tricky to understand and follow?
For me, what it actually does is just dilute the voice of the Peterborough people, because what you actually end up with is too many party rhetorics vying for their narrative to be held in a local space.
But I want to just go back to your initial question to Christian, which was, can we come together and remove the Conservatives from running the administration?
So it's technically possible today, tomorrow.
Wasn't it technically possible a few months ago?
No, it was, absolutely.
Yeah, from the moment of the election.
But what that would take is for all of the other parties and the independents to come together to form I'm going to use the C word here.
No, please do. I'm a big fan of the C word.
It's a coalition.
Coalition of chaos.
Chaos, indeed. I do. It does make me laugh, really, that what we're experiencing now isn't chaos, but they feel that if other people were to take control, suddenly it becomes chaos. I don't understand how that works. But anyway,
it's a common enemy, Christian.
Yeah. No, indeed. So, but the point is that we looked at the figures and we looked at the numbers of people that we would need, and ultimately to run the council we would need to be in a line with each other 100% of the time, specifically when it came to the budget and how the budget was being spent. Now,
sorry, just for a point of reference, Are you saying therefore that decision making would be too difficult because there would be too many voices?
So it not so much that, but it would rely on everybody being aligned and without much of a margin is the point. Sometimes when you have a majority, it's nice to have 3 or 4, so that if people don't turn up to a meeting or people have a particular issue with one part of policy that's happening on that evening on that decision, it puts it, dare I say it, too much power in the hands of one person or 2 people.
Absolutely, but my argument would be that too much power can also lie within a mob. I mean, Leon Tolstoy is famously quoted as saying, just because the majority believe in it doesn't make it right.
And I would agree with that, to be honest with you, but ultimately the practicalities of running a council needs stability, and it needs to have, you're not going to, the reason we generally join political parties is because you find the one that meets your needs in the best way, and that there will be some things that you're not quite on board with, and there will be other things that you are completely on board with, and in order to get those things through, you have to kind of take you've got to take the rough with the smooth.
Yeah, I mean this is one of the things that I've always considered to be true about the Liberal Democrats specifically, in that you're not completely tunnel vision in your political view. You're happy to take the rough with the smooth.
Yeah.
You're like, look, it's almost like the lesser of 2 evils. We'll make a concession on this if at the same time we can get something like this through, which we think is fantastic. And I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm sure some people think it's great, but I think there's maybe some considerations that you have to make, or some sacrifices you have to make, which are probably beyond where you'd want to sit on some kind of political spectrum.
I know I'm probably jumping ahead here a little bit,
yeah.
But if we get to a point of proportional representation, what that will mean will be a lot of different parties. The Conservatives will break up into a number of other splinters, and again with the Labour Party, you see it across the continent, and ultimately politics in that kind of situation needs compromise. You have to be willing to work with people, horse trade, and kind of go, okay, so this is something that we wouldn't do ourselves, but we can live with that. But you need to be able to do this for us that we think is really important for the people that vote for us.
Excellent.
Now this is actually where I feel you and me, and I feel we have agreed on most things here, Christian. We really have, and I think
That's
actually
politics.
our basis of,
actually, we
well,
normally
this
agree.
is where I disagree with you.
Okay.
I don't think what you're describing is politics. I think what you're arguing for is more of a move towards statecraft. Politics is having that multitude of voices in a room, hearing them all out, and no matter how long it takes, arguing it out and finding a way forward that is amicable with all. However, when you're actually looking at it in power dynamics based on a majority, what you're seemingly arguably trying to do there is actually quieten those dissenting voices, so as your voice can be heard louder and that policy can therefore be pushed through. And for me, that's statecraft, not politics.
Okay, just on that point, I completely agree with the premise of what you're saying, but doesn't that just grind process to a halt?
And underneath a 5-year voting period, yes, it would. However, if we bring everything down to libertarian municipality, and that is a perspective that actually brings the meaning of your municipal, your city, to the people that live there, and you meet regularly through people's assemblies, then decisions can be made very, very quickly, as long as you're calling on specialists to make the voice. Now, of course, as we've seen with governments that are in power locally, what they will tend to do is when the specialities go beyond their mental capacity, what they would do is they will call in consultants to help them find the specialities. That they need to
at
make these
£1,000 a
decisions.
day for 6 months. Yeah, why not?
Bring in people's assemblies, and you don't need to waste that money. What you're doing is you're enfranchising your local community to have a voice, and you will find that those same specialists live in the area that these choices are being made to affect.
But ultimately, you can't please all of the people all of the time.
You never can,
and,
of course.
People will always, if you're going to get a decision made, you are going to have a percentage of the people in that room who are not 100% happy with that decision.
Yes.
But hopefully what you do is you get them on board enough
Yeah.
that they feel comfortable with the fact that it's not what they want, but it is something that they can live with.
And that
would
reminds
agree.
me of
I would definitely agree with
that reminds me of the election in America with Donald Trump losing ultimately to Joe Biden, and he's basically thrown his toys out the pram, and he's just said I'm not willing to accept the result. And you see that time and time again, or here in the UK as well, local elections, national elections, where somebody's not selected, somebody plays the game, doesn't get the result they want, and then they cry foul.
Sure.
And it's like, that's not democracy. Democracy
not.
is you go in, you give it your best shot, you know what the rules of the game are, you play the rules, you count the votes up, and if you fall short, you fall short. And then you've got to say, look, the person who's got the most vote, and I know you're chomping at the bit here, but I think there has to be that concession for you to even take it seriously. If not, then what's to stop anyone from contesting any result ever?
Absolutely, but really it has to come down to our understanding of these words, doesn't it? What is democracy? Now, currently, and what we're talking about here is electing people to represent vast
Yes.
majorities of people, yeah? And the people we represent, on the by all and all, although Christian has just given great evidence for the number of independents that we have that are not bound by national rhetoric, but those in power locally are bound by national rhetoric. Conservative mantra comes from Conservative headquarters. Wayne Fitzgerald and those that are members of the Conservative Party who are in rule locally have subscribed to Conservative perspectives.
So I want to challenge that again. Just before I do, I want to read out a couple of comments that we've had. Elizabeth Bartley, Liz, is listening again. Thank you so much for contributing again, Liz. She says, what might be difficult for some people is that politics locally might be different from national politics. And I think that's exactly the point you're making around People Assembly. And Jonathan Orchard said, interesting discussion, guys. Democracy is not simple, is it?
No.
and the purpose of this show is I really want to bring it down to, not bring it, I don't want to say bring it down, sounds patronizing, but for the layman to be able to understand what we're talking about, what we're going on about. So if you indulge me just for a moment, I want to talk to you about the process to become a Labour councillor on the Peterborough City Council. Now, this is just my background. You can jump in whenever you like. But I had to become a Labour member. And that's to say you sign up to the Labour manifesto, policies, whatever it is. I became a Labour member.
And I imagine there's also rules on how you perceive and act in public that are based on that as well. Things you won't speak out against and things you will support.
So allegedly, yeah, but that's never stopped me. That's never stopped me. I'll say what I want to say. But then I became a Labour member under Jeremy Corbyn, and I decided to try and represent the Labour Party locally here in Peterborough. But you had to be a member for a certain period of time before you could even put yourself forward as a candidate. You put yourself forward as a candidate, you get interviewed by a selection panel who check to see if you are candidate material. Does he know his politics? Is he somewhat coherent? Is his communication good? Has he got a skill set that we could use in the group? Once you go past that, you then put yourself forward for the ward. You choose the ward that you want to stand in, and then the ward members come together and then they'll interview 2 or 3 people who are interested in that particular ward, and you hope that you can impress upon them how keen you are and how capable you are, and they vote for you. I got voted in by ward members to become the candidate. You have to jump through all those hoops before you even run a campaign.
And who decides what those hoops are, sorry?
So this is Labour Party.
And where are they
policies.
based?
They're based in London.
A long way away from Peterborough.
A very long way away from
and
Peterborough.
so is the argument here that all the hoops should be the same for every city? Sorry, just looking for confirmation.
So the aim is that all the hoops should be the same for every single city, yes. Every single city will have its own branch parties.
And that's where I fall down as that being representative of democracy.
Oh, so you think different cities should have different hoops?
One size sure doesn't fit all, and we've seen that in election campaigns by and by. Why did the Red Wall exist? Because the Northern Powerhouse perspectives and ideals did not match those of London.
So again, I think idealistically, I agree with you, but I just think to get things done, you need some kind of.
And this is what it's about. People keep saying this. You've said it now,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Christian has said it. To get
Maybe we're too
things
entrenched.
done. Who are we getting these things done for?
Yeah, the party is.
And the party
people.
or
the
the
people.
exactly the party or the people, and whose narrative should be the most prevalent in your decision making. Now, currently, my argument is that when we allow national politics into local governance, it is the national party's position that is prevalent over the local people's needs.
So
I'm not sure that's true.
I was.
I'm not sure that's true.
Please,
so,
Christian.
so I mean, even I can talk wax lyrical about how the Liberal Democrats are very, our policy is quite clearly that all decision-making process should be done at the most local, appropriate level.
So you guys would, if it was deemed suitable for the policy that was being evaluated, throw that out to a localised people's assembly?
I'm going to have to
Yeah.
pause both of you guys there. We're about to go to a break, and I just want to read a couple of comments, and we are going to come back after the break. Councillor Nicola Day said, on the point of being democratic and people's assemblies, the Greens have pushed hard to have people's assembly-style Peterborough climate debates. We basically have asked for local people's voices to feed into the citywide action plan on climate issues.
Do we see a Lib Dem Green coalition?
We have potentially, yeah, we have flipped the process whereby the report goes to committees and cabinets. Liz has said, if it's one person, one vote, every one should have a vote. Really interesting show, guys. We've had a lot to talk about. Plenty more to talk about in the second half of the show. Don't go away. You're going to have 4 minutes of messages and adverts, and after that, we'll be back to discuss a little bit more politics. Speak soon.
Thank you.
You're listening to Salam Radio, and it's now time for Isha Azan. This Azan is sponsored by Park Foods. Come and see the difference.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم رب هذه الدعوة التامة والصلاة القائمة آت محمدا الوسيلة والفضيلة وابعثه مقاما محمودا الذي وعدته. اللهم آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم بك نحيا وبك نموت وإليك المصير. رضينا بالله ربا وبالإسلام دينا وبمحمد صلى الله عليه وسلم نبيا ورسولا.
With you 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. This is Salam Radio.
This is
How many
indeed
to the
Salam
essay?
Radio, and we are back live. And yeah, Christian's made that big mistake of talking when the red light is showing. You've got to be on board with it.
Never be voted. Never be asked back, will I?
Well, no, the way the discussion is going, I'm sure we're going to get you back in very, very soon. 106.2 FM, thank you so much for joining us after that short break. And as always, we've had one half of the show and we've covered 1/16 of the topic content that we wanted to cover. So I'm going to try and
As
keep these
always.
guys, as always, I'm going to try and keep these guys down to schedule. We talked a little about local politics. Let's talk about national politics. So democracy is a great thing, isn't it? Democracy is fantastic. People go out and vote. Based on their votes, we have a government. Or is that the case? What about number of MPs compared to the number of votes that you receive
And
in a
this-
general election?
This is a really interesting point because, of course, in the UK, we are subscribed to a first past the post system, aren't we?
First past the post. That's
Now-
what it's called, yeah?
To put that into its basic understanding, how it says on the can is quite simply the candidate who gets the highest number of votes wins.
Okay, so if I'm contesting an award and there's 5 candidates and everybody gets like 19% and I get 23% of the vote, then I'm first past the post.
You are, until you start
Excellent.
breaking that down into shires and wards and MP seats.
Okay.
So when you actually take a vote, you're not voting for the National Party, you're voting for your local MP, which is something that a lot of people get wrong. I would guarantee that many people voted in 2019 putting a tick by the Conservative box, voting for Boris Johnson.
100%. I completely agree with
Yep.
that. Yep.
You're not. You're voting for Paul Bristow, aren't you? And the way that is levied up is that all areas are split into electoral seats, and these electoral seats are based often on economic and demographic data, unfortunately. So what you end up with is that a first past the post seat, you can have many millions of people voting for a single party in the UK, but they end up with very few seats.
So just give me the numbers for the Green Party.
Yeah.
So there's lots and lots of people that vote Greens. The Greens, what was the total number of votes that they got at the last general election?
835,000.
835,000. So about 0.8 million, right? 0.8 million. And they had one MP.
One MP.
One MP.
One MP.
I mean, there's. I've got a figure of 1.1, but I want to. put it here,
1.1
so-
versus 0.8. Okay, let's just say a
Yeah.
million. So they get a million votes per MP. So the Tories, they picked up 15 million votes. They should have 15 MPs, right?
But instead, 15 million votes categorises into almost 66 seats for the Tories.
No, it doesn't. It's a 66-seat majority.
Right,
It's
sorry,
a
my apologies.
380 MPs.
There you go.
360 or 380. So they
it's
picked
more.
up 15 million votes and they got over 300 MPs. And they had a massive majority. Labour shockingly got 2 million fewer votes, but they got like 150 MPs fewer than the Conservative Party. Lib Dems, I think you were looking at the numbers, Christian. Lib Dems picked up about 6 million votes and they managed to get 11 MPs.
Yeah.
Is that right?
So we should have got about 75 if it was purely on and the problem is you have this tactical voting situation. So for instance in Peterborough, this is a great example, it is a battleground between Labour and the Conservatives.
Okay.
So people end up voting not for the people that they want to win, but for the party that is going to beat the people that they don't want to win.
So this is tactical voting, right?
Tactical voting.
Excellent.
So,
We're going to talk about that. You've
yeah.
ticked it off already. But this is the problem with first past the post, isn't it?
Yeah.
First past the post is if your guy wins, and that's it. You forget all the other votes that went to the losing candidates no longer count.
Yeah.
Whereas proportional representation takes a nationwide view and it says you if you picked up, let's say you said 6 million out of a 30 million population, that's a 20% of the vote. The Lib Dems got 20% of the vote. They should get 20% of the 600 odd MPs. They should have 120 MPs versus what you actually have 11. Like you would benefit tenfold if we went from first past the post to proportional representation. So what's the Liberal Democrats' view on whether or not we should adopt proportional representation?
I think that's it's fairly clear, isn't it? Really, for as long as I've been in the party, and for quite some time before that, the Liberal Democrats have been very clear that proportional representation is the way forward. I think the Labour Party recently passed a motion at their conference to say that now you're in favour. Keir seems to be rolling back on that somewhat, saying that it's not a particular priority for him. But so it would be interesting to see if the Labour members stand up to that commitment and push their leader to make good on that promise.
And then the Greens, Alex, go on.
No, you've probably done me well.
Have I done you a favour there?
You've done
Right.
yourself a favour by interrupting
And
me.
the Greens, Alex Blower, clearly they're going to be in favour of proportional representation.
Well, of course they are. I mean, from that same election back in 2019, they should have really have had 10 plus seats, do you reckon, Christian, if we were to...
Probably.
Yeah, at 500,000 a seat, you'd be talking 10, 11 seats, yeah.
They have won. And let's be honest, right now they're the only left of centre party holding any seats in Parliament besides the SNP.
And the SNP was going to be my next
Left
question.
of centre, sorry.
Left to centre.
Apologies.
I would suggest that the Liberal Democrats are left-leaning.
I know you would.
Maybe
and
not
socially
as-
they certainly
maybe
are.
not-
However, until they stand up against neoliberal policies on the economic side, I'm going to
So
put
we
them in that
discussed
right
this.
centre camp,
We
Christian.
discussed this last week, and Alex did have a bit of a headache in where to place the Lib Dems relative to Labour.
And I do. And I'm going to be honest, you can split it.
It changes.
Yes, your economic policy and your social policies, I don't see that there is a complete rationale besides. Social policy is certainly left of centre. Economic is supportive of the plutocracy that is driving us towards extinction.
So we've had a few more comments in. Let me read those out, and then I'm just going to move us on a little bit. Jonathan Orchard says definitely should be some form of proportional representation, but also important to realise that there is no perfect system. I think that's really important because some of the criticisms around proportional representation is it allows in extreme elements. Like you could have, the BNP, for example, they would have had 2 or 3 MPs a few years ago.
It depends on the system that you adopt, because you can bring in a system that basically chops off the bottom,
subject to a minimum.
so subject to a minimum,
Yeah, okay.
and that kind of takes care of that. But it's a question of finding the right mix.
Yeah.
At the moment, we're not having that conversation. What
We need to have
does
the
PR
conversation.
need to look like?
Sure. No, I'd agree. with
It's
you
it's
there,
not
yeah.
a simple. It's going to be this system.
yeah.
Actually, there's a multitude of ways to go. There's the German system, there's the Irish system, etc., etc. So
I was going to say, I'm actually quite naive sat here thinking, what would it look like? Because I don't have good examples worldwide from other countries
can
and how
apply.
that can apply.
please don't ask
So
me
bes-
for details, because
Yeah, I'm
naive
sure
is
you've
definitely.
probably looked at
I
PR
have, but
systems.
I'm not going to be able to offer a hell of a lot more detail than what's already been offered here.
Yeah, let's have a chat about that later.
I mean,
then.
ultimately, do we want the German system? Do we want the Irish system? Or do we want the British system? So ultimately, what we need to do...
Our country, our rules.
Yeah, what we need... oh dear.
Sorry.
Oh dear.
Sorry.
So I would suggest that actually we need to have a conversation that works out a system that works best for us. Let's not take something off the shelf,
Yeah.
ready, done, oven ready. What we need to do is something that's ready for us, that's right for us, and works well, and that we take into consideration, what happens with, sort of the fringe elements that we possibly don't want to have, sort of clouding the chamber, as it were.
Yeah, Alex, a question for you. He talks like a politician, doesn't he?
It does, and I'm a little bit surprised on how much we agree on this evening.
Yeah,
I'm
this is-
going to be perfectly honest. What I'm hearing is that you understand that nothing is static,
Yeah,
that all
absolutely.
things are fluid, and that as people we need to be willing to make the changes that are best for the society around us. But my argument here would be is that it's all very well us looking at other, and us guys here are enfranchised in politics at looking at what else is out there.
Sure.
We need to educate the other people to make that applicable to society. You cannot bring something that everybody is alienated to and expect them to welcome it.
I'm just going to pull us away from that again. It's a really good point. I just want to read out this comment from Liz, who says, not often people text in to say, I definitely agree with Alex, but that's what she's saying. I definitely agree with Alex. We didn't get the candidate we chose. Our candidate was chosen by others. What might she be alluding to, Alex?
Well, this is probably where you interrupted me earlier a little bit
And
too early.
what else she said was, lots of people would vote Green or Lib Dems if they thought they, and this is what you're saying, Christian, if they thought they had any chance, but with first past the post, they wouldn't go for it. They just wouldn't go for it.
Now, I'd like to actually challenge that. And yes, we have been sold the two-party narrative. My argument would be actually the only thing that sustains the two-party narrative is our subscription to it. You're right, Lib Dems are a minor party, the Greens are a minor party, but if we hadn't been looking at them as people that couldn't take power for the past 30 years and giving them our vote, what would they have grown to now?
And this is what I wanted to come on to, and that is alternative vote. Because proportional representation, I think we said, is a genuine contender. But alternative vote is the system used to elect the mayor. Is that correct?
And the police commissioner as well, I believe.
And the police crime commissioner. Yeah, maybe the police crime commissioner, but
I
certainly
think
the
the
mayor.
operative word there is currently.
Yeah.
The fact that we've got a combined authority mayor that's not a Tory has meant that there's a change in thinking on how the voting may happen next time around.
Are you trying to say that the establishment do not want a Labour centralised mayorship in this area?
I think that the point that Christian is clearly making is there are more people that want somebody other than a Conservative mayor than want a Conservative mayor. That's the key thing. And it shows, certainly shows in Peterborough with the Lib Dems, the Greens, and Labour and Peterborough First working very closely together. You've got the opposition leaders' budget, you've got the FSWG and so on. But also in Huntingdon and Cambridge as well. There's genuinely an us and them. And if you have an us and them, and if you have a first past the post, then it's going to be Conservative or someone else. And the few by-elections we've had since Boris Johnson's completely disastrous fall from grace as Prime Minister have shown that when the Labour candidate pulls back, the Lib Dems win with a massive majority. When the Green candidate and the Lib Dem candidates pull back, Labour wins with a massive majority in traditionally Conservative seats. So either you're fixing your candidates and you're colluding behind closed doors on having a candidate, not having a candidate in order to beat the common enemy, or you have a system like alternative vote, which says, okay, first choice votes, has anybody gone over 50%? No. Second choice votes, let's go there. Anyone gone over 50%? No. Third choice, and we get there. And I believe with Nick Johnson, it was after the third round, after the Green candidate and the Lib Dem candidate was knocked out of the race, that the Labour candidate ultimately managed to get above. Because for the Greens, it was Greens, then Lib Dems, then Labour. For Lib Dems, it was Lib Dems, then Greens, then Labour. And ultimately, Conservative was number 4 for everyone.
My problems with this whole conversation.
Well,
really,
not everyone.
Okay.
There were
other than maybe about 35% of them.
Let's be real here. There were and quite a number of Conservative voters.
Yeah.
We should not forget that.
Yeah, not fair point.
But again, what you're saying is that we have more people that do not want Conservatives in power. What we're also seeing is that first past the post does not give those seats that people have voted for, the majority, the electorate that have voted for, a representation of seats in Parliament. So
that's correct.
Somebody is being sold short here, and it's not the parties, is it?
It's some of the parties.
But by all in all, it's the people, it's the electorate. They're the ones that are being stalled a voice. And even here, in the conversations you're having, discussing about one party stepping down for another, who gets to choose that?
Who gets
parties
to choose?
Between parties? The people should be the only people having any say in that.
Thoughts on that, Christian? Where do the Lib Dems stand on standing down candidates to enable a walk for the Greens or the Labour group?
I think it's a very tricky matter.
It is.
Because, as Alex says, it's, are we denying people that want to vote Liberal Democrat to vote for Liberal Democrat, even though we
Well,
feel
you either
that...
stand with democracy or power on this argument.
So I think the thing is that ultimately, we, as a party, certainly when it comes to by-elections, we have to decide: is it worth us putting, a few £1,000s worth of campaigning into an area where we know we're not going to win? Are we wasting our money? And would we best be served to save that money to vote to put into a campaign somewhere else where we can win?
Yeah.
And I think that it was less about us standing down for Labour, or Labour for that matter standing down for us. The Tiverton and
That's the
Honiton
one,
one was a massive overturn
Yes.
of majority. The majority was bigger than the one in North West Cambs. It was that big.
Yeah, so it went from completely impossible to, hang on, it's just happened,
Ultimately, if we can do it there, we could do it here.
And I do not digress, and I do not disagree with that point. What I would disagree with is the fact that what you're doing there is statesmanship, not politics, because you are limiting the options to the people in order to make sure that they choose the way that you want them to gain power for yourself,
And this
which
is-
is taking democracy away from the voting electorate.
This is the tricky thing, isn't it? This is the tricky thing. It's like, at what point do you say, I know better than the electorate? And that's a very patronising and very...
As soon as you start
To be clear, we did not stand down, and the Labour Party did not stand down either.
They just
They
didn't-
just
they
didn't
diverted
actively
funds away.
campaign in
Sure.
the way that
So through not actively campaigning, the electorate in that area were limited on the parties and therefore the options on the menu that they were able to vote for.
Then absolutely not.
Of course they were,
No,
because
because
Lib Dems didn't go, or you
No,
didn't
no,
actively...
the
you didn't
ballot
make yourself
paper
there,
still
so it
the
was
ballot paper was still had a Liberal Democrat name.
So on paper only. A candidate on paper only.
But
and anybody that's politically enfranchised understand what an on paper only ballot paper means.
Yeah, but Alex, I have to say, Labour Party have got a policy here in Peterborough where they have to stand a candidate for every seat that is contested,
Yep.
because we want to be a big party and we want to show.
But what does standing a candidate mean?
Exactly. There are a lack of candidates. You can't get a candidate that's actively involved in local politics, that's engaged,
So
that's
what
aware.
I'm actually hearing there then
Go
is
on.
that currently the parties that have a national influence locally are not fit for purpose to deliver the democratic process to the local people.
In Ithorny and Newborough, yeah, possibly. In
So
Barnet,
Alex,
possibly.
who
go on.
would you want to be standing?
I would want to hear a voice from the people. So I'm a big fan of coalitions. I'm a big fan of independence.
Yeah.
A lot of my local insight and
No, but which candidates? Which candidates? So just pick a ward. In Park Ward, who
Yep.
would you like to be standing in Park Ward?
a person who is a conduit for power to the people. You see, here's the thing. I do not believe that a councillor is elected to represent the people for 4 years without speaking to them.
Oh, absolutely.
I
Oh
believe
yeah,
a
I don't think
councillor-
anybody believes that.
A
Yeah.
councillor
Well-
should only be
There's always exceptions.
Gosh.
is the conduit. That is your role. You're not there to use power.
Yep.
You're not there to wield power. You are there to be the power of the people who elected you.
Yeah.
Can I say, I don't think councillors have power. Like, I think there's a misconception that you're elected as a councillor and all of a sudden you have power. There's very little power that you actually have. And it's taken me 2 years to actually realise that there's so many things that I've got zero influence over, even though I thought I'd be, pointing my wand and magic things would be happening. It's really not like that. You've got a whole malaise of things to just get
Is
through.
that because of what is above you and the level of ceiling that you have to operate within? I mean, surely you know what your electorate wants.
I absolutely know what my
Yep.
electorate wants.
But
But
so
not
you're
being able to deliver that is
it.
not being able to deliver is actually a point of frustration.
There you go.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's where my outlook differs from you guys who are entrenched in the current political system. I'm not supporting the current political system. I'm not supporting your role in it, I'm afraid, either. In fact, in my ideology, both your roles would be totally washed out the window, I'm afraid, because people would be speaking to each other, using local expertise and finding the best way forward together.
I would argue that the operative word within the word is ideal. In an ideal
Absolutely,
situation,
absolutely, yes.
I can see how what you're saying would work. How you could see would be the best way forward, but it just simply won't work. Is the point?
So
And
need to back
ultimate-
that up with
And,
something.
I'll back up with something. We've got a People's Assembly in Peterborough.
We have.
A lot of familiar faces.
Now, are you talking about the People's Assembly organisation that you and me are involved in, or are you talking about the democratic process on environmental change, which has been set up as a People's Assembly to offer the people of Peterborough a voice on what changes they want to see happen environmentally locally?
I'm talking about the People's Assembly Peterborough.
Right. Well, the kind of People's Assembly I'm talking about is the one that has been set up
Which we
to
don't
allow,
have. Which we
yes,
don't-
we do on ecology, and we have it running now in the Peterborough area. We're one of only two cities nationally to be able to offer this level of democracy to the people, and the people of Peterborough, along with the people of Manchester, actually have a role to play in how their city now acts environmentally going
So
forward.
isn't that an evolution?
Absolutely,
That's not
it
something,
is, and
that's-
everything
yeah,
should
yeah,
evolve.
but that's not.
always.
Yeah, so that's not something where you can switch a light off and switch a light on, and all of a sudden it's gone. You've evolved because discussions around climate change, discussions around ecology, and discussions around things like energy and regeneration, all that kind of stuff. Those were discussions that were taking place elsewhere.
Yes.
And it's almost been redirected to this new organisation that's come together, a new group of people that's come together, and they're going to start making decisions. So there's that. What's the word where you
Discourse?
Discourse, but also the passing down of power to this particular entity.
So there's a transition.
There's a
that's-
transition,
yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely.
So
But
it's
that
an
hasn't
evolution.
happened naturally, though, has it? I mean, you have to look at the work that Extinction Rebellion have done to foment the ground for these conversations to happen, to allow this to then happen as a reaction to that becoming the norm.
Well, Jonathan Ocean said, vote for Alex. Alex doesn't want your vote. He wants to bring voting down.
I don't believe in leaders.
Councillor Nicodemus commented again saying Britain only shares the same system in Europe as Belarus
Right.
for voting.
We should have Nicola on the
Which
show
I
sometime to
did
give us
not
some
know.
amazing
That's
insight that
incredible.
she holds.
And Liz Bartley said we shouldn't have to collude. And I completely agree with Liz
I do
Bartley.
as well.
You shouldn't have to. And it's almost like saying we know better than the
Well,
electorate.
collusion behind closed doors during
Is-
a democratic process is anti-democratic.
It's anti-democratic. But if we had a different system of voting, for example, PR or alternative vote, then you wouldn't have to, would you?
Absolutely. Or,
Yeah.
or regular people's assemblies by committees of the people.
We've only got 4 minutes left. We've talked about tactical voting. One thing I do want to quickly come on to is, you know what? I've got gerrymandering, voter apathy in education. I'm going to go voter apathy.
We're not going to try and tackle the monarchy in 4
Yeah,
minutes.
we're not doing the monarchy. Voter apathy. Christian, you must be frustrated. I know you're in Flint and Stand ground.
30%.
30% turnout.
So across the city, the last election, depending on which ward you were in, it could have been down as low as 20% turnout and up as high as 40, but that was an outlier.
That was an outlier, yeah.
Yeah. So, whereas the general election was more like 60, 70%, something like that.
2 out of 3 vote for a general election.
Yeah.
1 out of 3 vote for a local.
You know,
Yeah.
and ultimately, this is where we're falling down on the people. Ultimately, clearly, people are just not engaged enough to want to go out and vote, and it's very, very perplexing as to how to improve those figures.
And then just leaning on what Alex is, the point that Alex is making, because I think this is right up the street.
Absolutely it is,
At
yeah.
what point do you have a turnout that's too low for you to take seriously? Like, if you got voted in on a 20% turnout, would you say that there was any appetite for the people of Flint and Stand ground being represented by you? Or would you say, do you know what, that's just not enough? I can't, in my right, frame of mind.
So, what would the alternative be? Run it again?
I don't know. I'm just wondering. At what point do you?
I would put this to you. Without somebody making a change and standing up to highlight how undemocratic a 20% turnout is as putting into power, how can we ever expect
And
change?
I need to point out that that's not the numbers that you got.
No, it's
but,
not.
But I contested 2 years ago, and the turnout 2 years ago, the 3 years ago was 24%. And my number one criteria for success was, can we get that to above 30%? Yeah, whether I win or lose, can we get it
But you
above
want to
30%?
build on that, and that's
because
very
I
different
want
to the
people to
Tory
vote.
rhetoric here.
I want people to come out.
Sure.
It's actually different to the Labour rhetoric as well.
I'd agree, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that just say, we know our voters, let's get them out.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm like, we know the non-voters. Let's get them out.
Yes.
Let's speak to the non-voters and see why they're not voting. What is
Why
their
are they
issue?
not
What's their
involved in
problem?
this process?
So you
Jonathan-
have to bring them on. I mean, this is why we every year we do resident surveys in all our wards.
Okay.
Where we go door to door, or we post through the letterboxes in some areas because sometimes you've got 5,000 houses to get round. But we do a survey of all our residents, regardless of how they vote, and we ask them what their priorities are, so that we can make them those priorities our priorities, so that we know what they're. Is it the fact that it's potholes? Is it some of the minutiae of life? Is it the potholes?
I would just
Is
ask you
it-
the question: have you ever heard the phrase "you can only imagine based upon what you know"?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Completely.
a lot of people in Peterborough have been programmed to think that politics is about litter picking, street sweep ups, and potholes.
I agree. Completely.
It's
agree.
not.
No.
And the role of councillors, especially in Peterborough, needs to be to educating the people and let them know what other options might be
So
available. For us
right
to move
now,
forward
I mean,
as a
I'll
city.
just come back on this. Right now,
Sorry.
off the back
Okay.
of the improvement panel and SIPFA in Peterborough, we are doing things in a different way. I believe FSWG, opposition leaders,
We're
and so
moving
on.
in a direction.
We're moving in a direction. We've got split chairs across the different scrutinies.
Yep.
So you've got a Labour chair, Lib Dem chair, Green chair, and
And
so
there's
on.
also a lot of independent groups setting up, like Peterborough Action First, People's Assembly, Housing First.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think things are changing, but again, it's that shock, isn't it? SIPFA report, improvements panel got involved. You have a shock to the system, and things change. So absolutely, we don't want to give up hope on things changing, but maybe we do need an XR type shock. We do need some kind of shock to the system, guys. We're all out of time.
Wow, it's gone quick
just
again.
very, very quickly. Jonathan Orchard said compulsory voting ?
Absolutely,
Liz Bartley.
Jonathan, yeah.
Liz Bartley makes an excellent point. I don't think voters are apathetic. They are not educated enough to understand what difference it makes to their lives, which is your point on what they can.
And
we can only
Elizabeth,
fathom.
all I would say is that there's a reason why our current establishment keeps the UK average reading age at just 10 years of age, and it's to make sure that perspectives that don't grain against them are inaccessible.
10 seconds to go. I just want to take the time to thank Christian Hock so much for coming in. It's
been a pleasure, Christian.
Really
Thank you.
good.
Okay.
Alex, thanks as always. And to our listeners, thank you so much for taking part. We'll see you next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.